Hey guys, it's Sarah Norris
Carrie Eink
from the Star Institute, and today we're going to tackle the topic of proprioception. This is one that when I bring it up with clients, they're like, proprio what? Especially if they've never heard of it before. And even if they have, there's often, how do we use that word in context? Like, when is it proprioception? When is it proprioceptive? And what is, it's just kind of a little bit of a confusing word. But it basically is your muscle sensation. So you have receptors in your muscles and in your joints that respond to movement and position. And it's the sense that tells you where your body parts are in relation to yourself without having to look at them to see them. So knowing that my hands are where they are without actually looking at them or feeling them touch anything.
Yeah, so if you've been in occupational therapy in the past, or if you currently are, it's likely you've heard the word proprioception. Sometimes occupational therapists like to call it heavy work and heavy work activities. And so what that means, when they're giving you heavy work activities, those activities include pushing, pulling, hanging, carrying heavy objects. And what those activities are doing are giving input to those muscles and joints and waking up the proprioceptive system.
And proprioception is really important because it helps us understand where we are. And when you have a really under-responsive or difficulties with processing proprioceptive input, you can have a lot of issues that impact your sense of feeling grounded and being present. Some people describe it to feeling like they're kind of out floating or that they're detached from their body, and that when they get the right dosage of proprioceptive input, all of a sudden they feel connected. We've had someone tell us a story about how actually feeling like he was mapping his entire body because his proprioception came online.
Yeah, so proprioception is kind of a hard one for parents to know coming in of, does my child or does my teenager, does my spouse have proprioceptive challenges? So what does that look like through the lifespan? And I think one of the most common things that we hear from toddlers and young children is them being able to understand force and how much force they're using. So what this can look like is them pushing their friends in the classroom, them using too much force with their toys and accidentally breaking them not using enough pressure on the crayon or on the pencil. And so sometimes when we start hearing some of those challenges, that would indicate to us maybe we should look further into proprioception.
I think another thing that I see really commonly throughout the lifespan, but it's especially noticeable before kids really understand what's socially acceptable and they get that feedback of don't touch me from other people, is they're space invaders frequently. They will lean into other people, they will lay down on other people, they'll put their feet on other people. And essentially what they're doing is they're trying to get tactile input to compensate for not having enough proprioception. So it's giving them feedback from touch about where they are in space, not so much from just that internal sensation from their muscles and joints.
Yeah, and kind of going through the lifespan, elementary, even up to that early teenage years. Sometimes what I hear from parents or from teenagers themselves is walking with really heavy feet. Or even on your tiptoes. We see that a lot through the lifespan. There's a lot of reasons for toe walkers, but one of the reasons that we know about from a sensory perspective can be that you're looking for more input through your muscles and joints throughout your body. So going up in your tiptoes gives you less surface area and gives you more proprioceptive feedback, as does walking with those really heavy feet. So that was just one thing that I'm thinking about working with one of my teenage clients. We worked a lot on his proprioceptive awareness and he was getting more proprioception throughout his day. And the one thing he came in one day and said, I finally am walking with light feet and people are finally not yelling at me because I'm stomping through the house. And I tried so hard to think about walking lighter, but I just couldn't. And I think that's an excellent example of proprioception and how we can't just use the front of our brain to counter it.
I think the other area that I think about with proprioception is posture, because it's something that if you don't have great proprioception, and especially if it's combined with not a very good sense of balance and vestibular, then it's really can be seen in posture. So that's where you see a lot of the like leaning up against walls, leaning on the table, kind of slouching, moving position frequently. Those are all ways to compensate for decreased proprioception and to a certain extent vestibular functioning. So getting that extra input from your environment to make up for what you're not feeling in your body.
Yeah, and typically if you have difficulties processing proprioceptive input, likely your child or you have found ways to get more input. And so thinking about what naturally occurring activities give us proprioceptive input. So sweeping, raking, shoveling, snow is a really good example of that. I'll have adults come into the clinic and they say, I love shoveling. Just something about it, I'm not sure what it is. And once they start learning about what feedback they're getting from their joints, it really starts to make sense about, oh, this could maybe be one of those heavy work activities that really works for me. A lot of sports have a lot of proprioceptive input included in them. Swimming, as well as a lot of other sensations going on. Even running, when you're running, you're beating down harder on the ground than when you're walking.
Yeah, definitely weightlifting.
Yes.
Any of those endurance sports too, the more you use your muscles, the more you feel them. And so some people really enjoy exerting themselves and pushing their kind of aerobic output because it just feels so grounding and so regulating.
Yeah, one thing about proprioception that we talk about and why OTs use it as well is we call it the organizing sense. And so unlike a lot of our other senses that have a lot of calming or alerting characteristics, proprioception is the one typically that we use to organize. So it kind of brings the arousal to that just right place. And that is really, you'll hear OTs calling it all sorts of things, but I just call it, I like to talk to individuals about it being a really powerful sense for us, for all individuals, whether you have appropriate proprioceptive functioning or somewhere on the spectrum of inappropriate functioning, but any of us, when we get more proprioceptive input to our joints, our body feels more organized. So standing desks give us more proprioceptive input than sitting. Just some of those ways of thinking about it that a lot of us are doing throughout our days, getting movement breaks throughout the day, adding proprioception.
Definitely. And I think one of the things that I've worked with a lot of teachers over the years and parents too, and sometimes it can be a little bit overwhelming of knowing where to start when it comes to sensory strategies, like what's going to make the biggest impact for this child or for this individual. And I almost always start them with proprioception because it is, like Carrie said, very organizing for most individuals. There are a few that have a hard time just because maybe the praxis involved in it and things like that. But doing heavy work, going to that movement, exercise, body-based work, for most people is really, really organizing and can help them get through difficult situations like school.
Yeah, so if you're wondering, I wonder if this could maybe be one of the areas that's impacting me, impacting my child. Occupational therapists are great professionals to talk to about this. We have a lot of different ways we can assess it. We can assess it through clinical observations. We can assess it kind of taking a multitude of different types of tests and even parent reports. And occupational therapists have a whole range of tools to not only assess it, but then help you better process it and help you stay more organized throughout your day.
So that kind of brings us to the point where we were going to talk about the different profiles and how proprioception might look in those profiles. I think a lot of times when we're thinking about the modulation of sensory input, we see a lot of individuals that use proprioception to self-regulate. So they may be feeling disorganized because it's too loud or it's too chaotic or something smells bad. And so using pressure can offset and calm your nervous system. So doing things like moving frequently or seeking pressure, getting extra input, chewing really hard on things, you're using your muscles. And what I like to talk to teenagers about especially is like you're basically tricking your brain into you're doing something about what's stressing you. Your body is sending a message to your brain that you're responding to that fight or flight response you might be experiencing.
Yeah, and I think that pairs well with what we've talked about in previous videos, that some of these kids might come in as sensory cravers, when in reality we're seeing they're using that proprioceptive feedback to regulate themselves. And I think that's a really good point of how a kid seeking a lot of proprioceptive input might actually be a child who's just dysregulated because they're over responsive or because their sensory discrimination is poor. So I think that's a really good point.
Yeah, and I think probably where we see the most dysfunction with proprioception is with the discrimination of it. I think what we were talking about earlier about if you don't have that good registration of proprioception, you need extra input. So whether it's extra proprioception, extra tactile, extra movement, something to help you know where you are in space, and so that can really look at like challenges with body awareness and body mapping and even motor planning.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. So if you're not registering your body awareness accurately, it's really hard to have good posture and to have good praxis. And so posture and dyspraxia are two of the areas that a lot of times, if those movement sensations, such as proprioception, isn't processing appropriately, it's really common for us to see those difficulties in the motor-based areas as well.
So we hope this information's been helpful for you, has given you a little bit more knowledge about proprioception and how it can be so impactful, and also how we can use proprioception to help us. Let us know if you have any questions, and thanks for listening.